She bought a white man's life with 7 horses and a winter's worth of pelts. By nightfall, his fate was bound to hers, and the frontier would never forget what happened next. Before this story unfolds, subscribe for more tales of the Old West, and comment where you're watching from as the wind carries these words across the plains.
The dust hung in the air like a judgment that wouldn't settle. Fort Griffin, Texas, summer of 1873. The kind of day where the sun didn't just warm the earth, it punished it. Where men sweated through their collars and women fanned themselves in doorways, watching the street with eyes that had seen too much and expected worse. In the center of town, her crowd had gathered. Not the lazy, curious kind of crowd that forms when a traveling preacher sets up his tent or a card game turns loud. No, this was the hungry kind, the kind that smells blood before it's spilled and calls it justice. A wooden platform stood in the dirt, rough-hewn planks hammered together that morning, still bleeding sap in the heat. Atop it, 3 men, 2 in uniform, 1 in chains. The man in chains was tall, lean in the way men get when they've known hunger longer than plenty. His hair fell past his collar, dark with sweat and dust. His hands were bound in front of him, wrists raw from iron that had been fitted too tight. His shirt hung open, torn at the shoulder, revealing a lattice of old scars and fresh bruises that told a story the law hadn't bothered to read. His name was Dalton Reeves, and, according to the territorial marshal, he was a cattle thief, a drifter, and a man without enough friends to matter. The marshal stood beside him, a thick-necked man named Culver, who wore his authority like a ill-fitting coat, too much starch, not enough substance. He held a rolled parchment in one hand and gestured with the other as he addressed the crowd. "Gentlemen, ladies, we are gathered here in accordance with territorial law to see justice served and restitution made." His voice carried across the square, rehearsed and hollow. Dalton Reeves stands accused of the theft of 43 head of cattle belonging to Mr. Clayton Ashford. The theft occurred under cover of night. The cattle were recovered, but not before they were driven near unto exhaustion. The accused has no property with which to pay damages, no kin to speak for him, no employer to vouch for his character. Dalton stood motionless, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the crowd, as if he'd already left this place in spirit, even if his body remained. Culver continued, "Under such circumstances, the law permits one of 2 remedies: execution, swift and final, or sale of the accused into indentured service, his labor to satisfy the debt owed." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Some nodded, others whispered. A few looked away, uncomfortable with the theater of it all, but unwilling to speak against it. Mr. Ashford has graciously agreed to accept restitution in place of execution, provided a suitable buyer can be found. Failing that, sentence will be carried out at sundown. Culver let the words hang there, heavy as stones. "Who among you will bid?" Silence, the kind that stretches and thins until it becomes something unbearable. Men shifted their weight. Women clutched their shawls. No one stepped forward. Dalton Reeves was a stranger here, a man without roots, without history that mattered. Buying his service meant taking responsibility for him. It meant risk. And in a town like Fort Griffin, where survival was measured day by day and coin by coin, risk was a luxury no one could afford. The silence deepened. Culver's expression soured. He glanced toward the edge of the platform where a noose had been prepared, coiled and waiting like a sleeping snake. "Very well," he said. "If no bid is made, then by the authority vested in me, 7 horses." The voice cut through the air like a blade through cloth. Every head turned. At the edge of the crowd, a woman stood. She was Comanche. That much was clear in the way she wore her hair, braided and wrapped with leather cord, in the beadwork that adorned the shoulders of her buckskin dress, in the proud, unflinching way she held herself as 100 eyes turned toward her, some curious, most hostile. She was not young, but neither was she old. Perhaps 30 summers, perhaps more. The sun had touched her skin with bronze, and her eyes were the color of creekstone, dark and steady and impossible to read. Beside her stood a young Comanche man, barely more than a boy, holding the lead ropes of 7 horses. Beautiful animals, strong and well-fed, their coats gleaming even in the dust. The crowd parted, reluctant as she walked forward. Her steps were measured, deliberate. She did not hurry, nor did she hesitate. Marshal Culver stared at her, his mouth slightly open, as if he'd forgotten the script. "You're bidding?" he finally managed. "I am." Her English was clear, only lightly accented. She stopped at the base of the platform, her gaze lifting to meet Dalton's for the first time. He looked down at her, and something flickered in his expression. Confusion, maybe, or disbelief. 7 horses, she repeated. "And these." She gestured to the young man beside her, who stepped forward and placed a bundle at the marshal's feet. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside were pelts, beaver and fox, tanned and pristine, the kind that would fetch good money in any trading post from here to Santa Fe. Culver blinked. "This is highly irregular. Is it not a lawful bid?" "It is, but—" "Then I have made it." The marshal looked to the crowd as if seeking permission or protest. None came. The spectators simply watched, caught between fascination and unease. Clayton Ashford pushed through the press of bodies. He was a big man, red-faced and prosperous, with a belly that spoke of frequent meals and a temper that spoke of frequent whiskey. "Now, hold on," Ashford said, jabbing a finger toward the woman. "I ain't about to let some squaw walk off with my restitution." The word fell like a stone into still water. The woman did not flinch, did not blink. She simply looked at him with those steady, unreadable eyes. "The law permits any bid, or does your law change when the bidder is not to your liking?" Ashford's face darkened. "You got no business here. This is a white man's affair." "Then why does your law allow it?" Culver raised a hand, his voice tight. "Mr. Ashford, the bid is lawful. The value is fair, maybe more than fair. If you refuse it, you'll have to explain to the territorial governor why you turned down good payment in favor of a hanging that'll cost the county money and earn you nothing." Ashford glared at the marshal, then at the woman, then at Dalton, as if trying to decide which of them he hated most. "Fine. Let her have him. Won't be my problem when he cuts her throat in the night." He turned and shoved his way back through the crowd, muttering curses. Culver cleared his throat. "Very well. By the authority vested in me, I accept this bid on behalf of the injured party. Dalton Reeves, you are hereby remanded into the custody of—" "Your name, ma'am?" "Ayana, of the Penateca Band." "Ayana, you understand that you are now responsible for this man. His actions are yours to answer for. His debts are yours. Should he flee or cause harm, it falls upon you." "I understand." "Then the transaction is complete." Culver gestured to his deputy, who unlocked Dalton's chains with a key that rattled in the silence. The iron fell away, and Dalton rubbed his wrists, his eyes never leaving the woman who had just bought his life. The deputy pushed Dalton toward the edge of the platform. "Go on, she owns you now." Dalton stepped down into the dust. Ayana did not move to meet him. She simply turned and began walking, the young man with the horses falling into step beside her. For a moment, Dalton stood there unsure. Then he followed. Behind him, the crowd began to disperse, their voices rising in a buzz of speculation and judgment, but Dalton heard none of it. He walked 3 paces behind the woman called Ayana, his mind a tangle of questions he did not know how to ask. They reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open plain, and still she did not speak. Finally, Dalton found his voice. "Why?" She did not turn. "Why what?" "Why did you do that? You don't know me." "No," I agreed. "I do not." "Then why pay for me? Those horses alone." "They were mine to give." "Lady, I got nothing. No land, no money, no way to pay you back. If you'd expecting—" Now she stopped. She turned to face him, and the weight of her gaze silenced him more effectively than any words could. "I do not expect. I do not demand. What I have done, I have done. You are free to leave if that is your wish." Dalton stared at her. "Free? You heard me. You just paid 7 horses and a season's worth of pelts for me, and you're telling me I can walk away. If that is your choice." He looked back toward Fort Griffin, then out in the open land stretching endlessly in every direction. He had no horse, no supplies, no weapon. The nearest settlement was days on foot, and the frontier was not kind to men traveling alone. "And if I stay?" he asked carefully. "Then you ride with me." "To where?" "Away from here." "That's not an answer." For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but something softer than stone. "It is the only answer you need today." Then she turned again and continued walking. Dalton stood there a moment longer, feeling the weight of his freedom settle strange and unfamiliar on his shoulders. Then he followed her into the wild. They rode north for 3 days. Dalton had been given one of the horses, a sturdy roan mare with a patient temperament. He rode in silence, watching the landscape change from scrub brush to rolling hills, from bare earth to grassland that whispered in the wind. Ayanna led, always 3 lengths ahead, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the horizon with the ease of someone who had read the land since childhood. The young man, whose name Dalton learned was Dakota, rode beside him occasionally, offering strips of dried meat or water from a skin without being asked. He spoke little English, and what he did speak came haltingly, but his presence was easy, companionable even. On the evening of the 3rd day, they made camp beside a shallow creek. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of copper and rust. Ayanna dismounted and began gathering wood for a fire with practiced efficiency. Dakota tended the horses, and Dalton, unsure of his place, simply stood and watched. "You can help," Ayanna said without looking at him, "or you can stand there like a post." Dalton moved. He gathered stones to circle the fire, then helped Dakota unsaddle the horses and brush them down. The work felt good, purposeful. It had been a long time since his hands had done anything that wasn't aimed at survival or escape. When the fire was lit and the first stars began to prick the darkening sky, Ayanna prepared a simple meal, cornmeal cakes cooked on hot stones, rabbit that Dakota had snared earlier, water heated with sage and wild mint. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Dalton spoke. "Where are we going?" Ayanna chewed slowly, then swallowed. "To my people." "Your tribe?" "What remains of it." He heard the weight in those words, the history she did not elaborate on. "And what happens when we get there?" "You will be fed, sheltered, given work if you want it." "And if I don't want it?" She looked at him across the fire, her face half in shadow. "Then you leave. I will not stop you." "You keep saying that, like you expect me to run." "Do you wish to?" Dalton considered the question. A week ago, the answer would have been simple. Yes, run, keep moving, trust no one. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the way she'd stood in that crowd, unbothered by their stares. Maybe it was the 3 days she'd ridden ahead without once looking back to see if he followed. Maybe it was the simple fact that she'd saved his life and asked for nothing in return. "No," he said quietly, "I don't." Ayanna nodded, as if she'd expected that answer all along. "Then you will come to understand why I did what I did." "Which is what?" "In time." Dalton frowned. "You're not going to tell me?" "I am not." "Why not?" "Because if I tell you, you will not believe. You will think it is a lie or a trick or something meant to bind you. But if you see it," she paused, her gaze steady, "then you will know it is truth." The firelight danced in her eyes, and Dalton felt something in his chest tighten. Not fear, not suspicion, something else, something he couldn't name yet. He looked away, into the darkness beyond the camp. "I didn't steal those cattle," he said suddenly, "in case you were wondering." "I know." He turned back sharply. "How?" "Because thieves do not stand the way you stood. They beg, they lie, they make bargains." She stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "You did none of those things." "Then you knew I was innocent." "I knew you were accused," she corrected. "Innocence and guilt are words men use when they need someone to blame. The truth is often more complicated." Dalton studied her, this woman who spoke in riddles and moved through the world like water, shaping herself to the terrain without ever losing her course. "Who are you?" he asked. Ayana smiled then, a real smile, small and fleeting, like a bird that lands for a moment before taking flight again. Someone who knows what it means to be blamed for crimes she did not commit. And with that, she rose, wrapped herself in a blanket, and lay down on the far side of the fire. Dalton sat awake long after, staring into the flames, turning her words in his mind like stones in a river.
They reached Ayana's camp on the 7th day. It was not what Dalton had expected. He had imagined a village, perhaps. Teepees arranged in circles, smoke rising from cooking fires, children running between lodges, the remnants of a tribe still holding on to the old ways. Instead, they came upon a small cluster of shelters built into the curve of a red rock canyon. No more than a dozen structures, half of them little more than brush and hide, stretched over bent branches. A few horses grazed in a makeshift corral. A handful of people moved about the camp, elders mostly, and a few women with children too young to remember what life had been like before the world changed. It was a place of survivors. Ayana dismounted, and immediately an older woman emerged from one of the shelters. Her hair was gray, her face lined with years, but her movements were spry. She spoke rapidly in Comanche, her tone sharp with what sounded like both relief and reprimand. Ayana responded calmly, gesturing toward Dalton. The older woman's eyes widened. She said something else, quick and incredulous. Ayana's reply was firm, final. The older woman studied Dalton for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been resignation or amusement. She turned and called out to the others. People began to gather, slowly, cautiously. Dakota took the horses and Ayana motioned for Dalton to follow her into the center of the camp. He walked beside her, acutely aware of every eye upon him. He was the only white face here, the only outsider. An old man approached, leaning on a walking stick. His eyes were clouded with age, but his voice was strong. He spoke in Comanche, addressing Ayana. She responded, her tone respectful. The old man turned his gaze to Dalton. He said something that Dalton didn't understand, then reached out and placed a weathered hand on Dalton's shoulder. The gesture was brief, but in it, Dalton felt something he hadn't felt in years. Acceptance. The old man withdrew, and Ayana led Dalton to one of the larger shelters on the canyon's edge. "You will stay here. It is small, but it is yours." Dalton looked inside. A bedroll, a clay pot for water, a place for fire, nothing more. "And you?" he asked. She pointed to a shelter 20 paces away. "There." "Who was the old man?" "His name is Takchawana. He leads what remains of our people." "What did he say to me?" Ayana hesitated, then met his eyes. He said, "The woman who walks between worlds has brought you here. Do not shame her choice." Dalton felt the weight of that. "And the woman who met us first?" "My aunt, Nia. She thinks I am foolish." "Is she red?" Ayana's smile returned, faint and knowing. "Time will tell." She turned to leave, then paused. "There will be a gathering tonight, a meal. You will be expected." "Expected to do what?" "To eat, to listen." She glanced back over her shoulder. "And if you are wise, to observe." Then she was gone, leaving Dalton standing at the threshold of a shelter in a canyon he had never seen, among people who had no reason to trust him, brought there by a woman whose motives remained as mysterious as the stars beginning to appear in the sky above the canyon. He sat down on the bedroll and let out a long breath. For the first time in his life, Dalton Reeves had no idea what came next. And strangely, he was not afraid. The gathering that night was simple. A fire in the center of the camp, people seated in a loose circle around it. Food passed from hand to hand, roasted meat, cornmeal, wild onions cooked in their skins. The children sat close to their mothers, stealing glances at Dalton when they thought he wasn't looking. Dalton sat near Ayana, who sat near Takchawana. The old man spoke at length in Comanche, his voice rising and falling like a song. The others listened with the kind of attention that comes only when words carry weight. Dalton understood none of it, but he listened anyway. When Takchawana finished, Ayana leaned close and translated, her voice low. "He is telling the story of how the world was made, how the Creator gave the people horses, and the horses gave the people freedom.
how freedom was stolen, and how it must be remembered even now. Does he tell this story often? Every night, she said, so that the children do not forget. Dalton looked at the young faces around the fire, their eyes wide and solemn. They're too young to remember the way things were, he said quietly. That is why the story matters, Ayanna replied. After the meal, people began to drift away, returning to their shelters. Dalton rose to do the same, but Ayanna touched his arm. Walk with me. They moved away from the camp, into the shadows at the canyon's edge. The night was cool, the sky brilliant with stars. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. Ayanna stopped at a flat stone overlooking the canyon floor. I will tell you now why I bought your life, she said. Dalton's pulse quickened. All right. She did not look at him. She kept her gaze on the horizon, as if the words she needed were written there in the dark. 5 years ago, my husband was killed by white men. They came to our camp while the men were hunting. They said we were on land that did not belong to us. They said we had stolen horses. Neither was true, but truth did not matter to them. Her voice was steady, but Dalton heard the grief beneath it, old and deep. My husband tried to speak with them, to explain. They shot him in the chest. He died before the sun set. Dalton felt something cold settle in his gut. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Ayanna continued. The men who killed him were never punished. No law came for them. No justice was given. They rode away and life continued, as if his death meant nothing. She turned to face him now, her eyes catching the faint light of the distant fire. I tell you this not to make you guilty. You did not kill him. But I tell you so you understand. When I stood in that square and saw you on that platform, I saw something I recognized. What? A man the world had decided was worthless. A man the law had already judged. A man who would die so that other men could feel righteous. Her words hung between them, heavy and true. I could not save my husband, but I could save you. I swallowed. That's why you did it? To balance the scales? No, she shook her head. I did it because I refuse to let this world make me cruel. I refuse to see suffering and turn away simply because the one suffering is not in my blood. She looked at him with an intensity that made him feel seen in a way he never had been before. You are here because I chose mercy. Not because I am naive, not because I am weak, but because mercy is the only thing that separates us from the men who take and destroy and call it justice. Dalton felt something crack open inside him, some part of himself he had kept locked away since the day he'd been accused, since the day he'd stood on that platform expecting to die. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Then say nothing. Just live. Live well. Live with honor. That is the only thanks I need. They stood in silence for a long moment, the night stretching vast and endless around them. Finally, Dalton spoke. Your husband, what was his name? Ayanna's expression softened. Casa, it means dressed in furs. He was a hunter, the best I ever knew. I wish I could have met him. So do I. They walked back to the camp together, side by side, and for the first time since arriving, Dalton felt like he belonged. Not because he had earned it, but because she had given it freely. The days turned into weeks. Dalton worked. He helped repair shelters. He hauled water from the creek. He learned to string bows and fletch arrows under Dakota's patient instruction. The young man had taken a liking to him, teaching him words in Comanche, laughing when Dalton's pronunciation mangled them beyond recognition. The others in the camp warmed to him slowly. Naya, Ayanna's aunt, still watched him with wary eyes, but she no longer objected to his presence. The children grew bold, daring each other to approach him, then fleeing in delighted terror when he smiled. And Ayanna was always near but never intrusive. She moved through the camp with quiet authority, tending to the sick, settling disputes, organizing the work that kept them fed and sheltered. She asked nothing of Dalton beyond what he offered freely, and in return she gave him something he hadn't known he needed: a place. They spoke often in the evenings, small conversations at first about the day's work or the weather or the animals they'd seen. But as the weeks passed, the conversations deepened. She told him about her childhood, about running wild across the plains when the Comanche still held dominion over lands that stretched farther than a man could ride in a month. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to fever, about drifting west with nothing but a horse and a dream that had died somewhere along the way. She asked him about the cattle, about what had really happened. He told her the truth. He'd been working for a rancher named Colby, driving cattle north. One night he'd noticed a group of riders cutting steers from the herd. He'd confronted them and recognized one of them as Ashford's foreman. Before he could report it, the foreman had turned the accusation around, claiming Dalton was the thief. By the time Dalton rode back to explain, Colby had already fired him and Ashford had called in the marshal. They needed someone to blame, Dalton said bitterly, and I was convenient. Ayanna listened without judgment. When he finished, she simply nodded. The world is full of men who would rather destroy than admit they are wrong, she said. Doesn't that make you angry? Every day, she admitted, but anger is a fire. It can warm you or it can consume you. I choose warmth. One night, as they sat by the creek under a sky so full of stars it seemed impossible that anything bad could exist in such a world, Dalton asked the question that had been building in him for weeks. Why do you stay here? Ayanna looked at him, puzzled. Where else would I go? Anywhere. You're smart, you speak English better than half the white folks I know. You could leave, start over somewhere new. And abandon my people? There's only a handful of you left. Then they need me all the more. Dalton shook his head. I just don't understand how you keep going after everything that's been taken from you. Ayanna was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up a smooth stone from the creek bed and held it up to the moonlight. Do you see this stone? She asked. Yeah? The water has been running over it for 1,000 years, wearing it down, shaping it. But it is still here, still whole. She placed the stone back in the water. That is what we do. We endure. We let the world shape us. But we do not break. Dalton felt something shift in his chest, a loosening, a release. You're the strongest person I've ever met, he said quietly. Ayanna smiled. You have not met very many people then. I'm serious. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't seen before. Something that made his breath catch. Softness. You are not so weak yourself, Dalton Reeves, she said. And for the first time in years, he believed it might be true. It happened on a day that began like any other. Dalton was mending a torn piece of hide near the edge of camp when Dakota came running, his face pale, his breath short. Riders, he gasped in broken English. Coming fast. Dalton dropped the hide and stood. How many? 6, maybe 7. Ayanna appeared at Dalton's side, her expression sharp. Armed? Dakota nodded. She turned to Dalton. Get the children inside. Keep them quiet. What about you? I will meet them. Like hell you will. If they're trouble, then I will deal with it. Her voice was steel. Go. Dalton wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. He nodded and moved quickly, gathering the children, ushering them into the largest shelter. Nia and the other women followed, their faces tight with fear. By the time Dalton emerged, the riders had reached the canyon's entrance. 7 men, dusty and hard-eyed, their horses lathered from hard riding. They wore the rough clothes of drovers, but their hands rested on the guns at their hips with the ease of men who used them often. At their head rode a man Dalton recognized immediately. Clayton Ashford's foreman, a lean, cold-eyed man named Pike. Ayanna stood alone in the center of camp, Takchawana beside her. The old man leaned on his walking stick, his clouded eyes fixed on a rider's. Pike reined his horse to a stop and looked around the camp with the kind of disdain that needs no words. "Well now," he said slowly, "this is a sorry sight." Ayanna did not move. "You are not welcome here." "That's so." Pike spat into the dirt. "Don't much care what you think, Squall. We're here for something that belongs to us. Nothing here is yours." "We'll be the judge of that." Pike's gaze swept the camp and landed on Dalton, who'd moved to stand at Ayanna's shoulder. Pike's expression changed. Recognition. Then something darker. "There he is," Pike said, grinning. "Dalton Reeves, the man who thought he could steal from Mr. Ashford and get away with it." "I didn't steal anything, and you know it. What I know is you were bought and paid for, and what I hear is you ran off the first chance you got." "He didn't run. He is here by choice." "Yours or his?" Pike leaned forward in his saddle. "Doesn't matter. That sale was illegal. Ashford's lawyer looked into it. Turns out a savage can't buy a white man, not in the eyes of Texas law." A chill ran down Dalton's spine. "The marshal approved the sale." "Marshal's been overruled, which means Reeves here is still property, and we're taking him back." "No," Ayanna said simply. Pike's smile vanished. "You don't get a say in this." "I do. He is under my protection." "Your protection?" Pike laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Lady, you got maybe 12 people here, half of them old or young. You think you can stop us?" "I think," Ayanna said, her voice dropping to something dangerous, "that you should leave now." Pike's hand drifted to his gun. "Or what?" Before anyone could answer, Tukchawana spoke. His voice was strong, carrying across the camp in a language Dalton didn't understand, but felt in his bones. Pike looked at the old man with contempt. "I don't speak your heathen tongue." Dakota stepped forward, translating. "He says you ride into our home with threats. You claim law that was written to break us. You take and call it justice. But there is a law older than yours, a law written in blood and bone and the land itself. He says if you take this man, you declare war, and old as I am, I still remember how to fight one." A tense silence fell. Pike studied Tukchawana, then Ayanna, then the camp around him. He was calculating, weighing the cost. Finally, he spat again and pulled his horse back. "We'll be going. But this ain't over. Mr. Ashford wants what's his, and he'll get it." He yanked his horse around and rode out, his men following. The camp watched them go, not a soul moving until the riders disappeared beyond the canyon's mouth. Only then did Ayanna exhale. Dalton turned to her. "They'll come back. I know. With more men. I know. Then we need to leave, all of us, find somewhere safer." Ayanna shook her head. "This is our home. It's a death trap." "Then so be it." "Ayanna!" She rounded on him, her eyes blazing. "Do you think we have not already run? Do you think we have not already lost everything, again and again, moving from place to place, chased by men who see us as nothing? This canyon is all we have left. If we leave now, there will be no place to run to, only more running, forever." Dalton stared at her, seeing the exhaustion beneath the strength. The weight of years bearing down on shoulders that had already carried too much. "I'll leave," he said, "if that's what it takes to keep them from coming back." "No!" The word cracked like a whip. Ayanna stepped closer, her voice shaking. "You do not get to sacrifice yourself for me. Not after I fought to save you. Not after—" She stopped herself, breathing hard. The silence between them stretched like a rope pulled taut. "What happened?" Dalton asked softly. Ayanna looked away. "Nothing. That wasn't nothing." "Leave it, Dalton." But he couldn't. Not now. Not when he'd seen the crack in her armor, the vulnerability she'd kept hidden behind duty and strength and mercy. "Ayanna, look at me." She did, reluctantly, and in her eyes he saw everything she hadn't said, everything she'd been carrying alone. "You feel it too," he said, not a question, a realization. She closed her eyes. "I should not." "Why not?" "Because I am a widow. Because you are—" She struggled for words. "Because this was never supposed to happen." "What wasn't?" This, she gestured between them, helpless and frustrated. I saved you because it was right, not because I wanted, not because I thought. She trailed off, and Dalton felt his heart hammering against his ribs. I think about you, he said quietly, all the time. The way you stand, the way you speak, the way you see the world like there's still something worth believing in. I've been alone for so long I forgot what it felt like to want to stay in one place, but now I do. Because you're here. Ayana's breath hitched. I know I got no right. I know I'm nobody, a drifter with nothing to offer, but I need you to know. Whatever happens next, I need you to know that these weeks with you have been the best of my life. The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Ayana opened her eyes, and they were bright with tears she would not let fall. You are not nobody, she whispered. You are the man I see when I close my eyes, the voice I listen for when the day is long, the reason She stopped, shook her head. It does not matter. They are coming for you, and I will not let them take you. Then what do we do? For the first time, Ayana looked uncertain, lost. I do not know, she admitted. Dalton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He took her hand in his, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her fingers. Then we'll figure it out together, he said. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. Together, she echoed. And in that moment, despite everything, Dalton felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Tokchawana called a council. They discussed their options. Some wanted to flee deeper into the territories. Others wanted to stand and fight. In the end, it was Ayano who proposed a third path. We send word to the territorial governor, she said. We make it known what Ashford is attempting. We demand that the law be upheld as it was written. Naya scoffed. The law has never protected us. Then we make it, Ayana replied. The marshal approved the sale. It was witnessed by the town. If Ashford's lawyer claims it was illegal, then let the governor decide, but we do not simply accept their judgment. And while we wait for the governor, another elder asked, what stops them from coming back with guns? We prepare, Dalton said. We set watches. We make it clear we won't be taken easily. Tokchawana nodded slowly. The white man speaks wisdom. We have been prey too long. It is time to show teeth. A messenger was sent east, carrying a letter Ayana had written in careful English, explaining the situation and requesting intervention. It would take weeks for a response if one came at all. In the meantime, they fortified the camp. Dalton and Dakota built barriers at the canyon's entrance. The men who could still fight, old as they were, checked their weapons. Even the women prepared, gathering stones and sharpening knives. But it was not enough. On the 5th day, Pike returned. This time he brought 15 men. They rode in at dawn when the light was weak and the camp was just stirring. Dalton was on watch at the canyon's mouth when he saw them coming, a line of riders spreading across the plain like a dark stain. He ran back to camp, shouting the alarm. People scattered. Children were hidden. The few men capable of fighting took their positions. Ayana stood in the center of it all, a rifle in her hands, her face set like granite. Pike rode to the barrier Dalton had built and stopped, looking at it with amusement. That's real cute, he called out, but it ain't gonna stop us. Then you'll have to come through it, Dalton shouted back, and you'll bleed for every step. That a threat? It's a promise, Pike grinned. Guess he was right. He looked past Dalton to where Ayana stood. Last chance, lady. Hand him over and we'll leave peaceful. He is not mine to hand over, Ayana said. He is his own man. Then you're choosing this. I am. Pike shook his head, almost regretful. So be it. He raised his hand and the riders began to advance. Dalton's heart pounded. He gripped his rifle, knowing they were outnumbered, knowing the odds were impossible, but unwilling to back down. The riders were 20 yards away. 15. 10. And then from the east came a sound like thunder, hoofbeats, dozens of them. Pike jerked his horse around and his expression changed from confidence to confusion to something approaching fear. A second group of riders crested the rise, riding hard, dust billowing behind them. But these weren't Ashford's men. They were Comanche. 20 warriors painted for war, their horses swift and their weapons ready. At their head rode a man Dalton didn't recognize but whose presence commanded immediate respect. The warriors spread out, forming a line between the camp and Pike's men. Pike stared, his jaw working. What the hell is this? The lead warrior rode forward. He spoke in English, his accent thick, but his words clear. This is our land. These are our people. You have no business here. This ain't your concern, Pike said, but his voice had lost its edge. You make it our concern when you threaten those who shelter under our protection. Ashford won't stand for this. Then let Ashford come himself. Let him explain to the territorial governor why he sends armed men to attack a peaceful camp. Let him explain why he violates treaties and breaks the law he claims to uphold. Pike looked from the warriors to his own men, who were shifting nervously in their saddles. "This ain't over," Pike said, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. "It is over," the warrior replied. "Go and do not return." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Pike spat one final time and wheeled his horse around. His men followed, riding hard, eager to put distance between themselves and the warriors who had appeared like ghosts from the plains. The camp erupted in cheers. Ayanna walked forward to meet the lead warrior, and they spoke rapidly in Comanche. The warrior smiled, and Ayanna pressed her hand to her chest in gratitude. When she returned to Dalton, her eyes were bright. "Who are they?" he asked. "Distant kin. Tokchawana sent word 3 days ago. I did not know if they would come." "Why did they?" "Because he told them what I had done for you, and because they believe that mercy deserves to be defended." Dalton looked at the warriors who were dismounting, being greeted by the camp with joy and relief. "We're safe?" he asked. "For now, but Dalton, this does not end here. Ashford will not stop, and the law will side with us," Dalton interrupted. "Because if it doesn't, then there's no law worth following." Ayanna smiled sadly. "You still have faith in their justice?" "No," Dalton said. "I have faith in yours." She looked at him, and something passed between them, something unspoken but understood. "Come," Ayanna said. "There is much to do." But as they walked back to the camp together, Dalton allowed himself to believe for the first time that maybe they would survive this, that maybe they could build something lasting, that maybe, against all odds, they had found each other for a reason. The response from the territorial governor came 6 weeks later. A rider arrived bearing an official letter, sealed with wax and written in the careful hand of a bureaucrat who had weighed his words carefully. Ayanna read it aloud to the gathered camp, translating as she went. The sale, the letter stated, was legal. The marshal had acted within his authority. Ayanna's payment had been accepted under territorial law, which made no distinction based on race in matters of indentured service. The lawyer Ashford had hired had misinterpreted the statutes, and the governor had overruled his claim. Furthermore, any attempt by Ashford or his men to seize Dalton Reeves by force would be considered kidnapping and prosecuted accordingly. The case was closed. When Ayanna finished reading, the camp sat in stunned silence. Then Tokchawana began to laugh. It was a dry, wheezing sound at first, but it grew into something rich and full, and soon others joined him. The sound of relief, of disbelief, of joy at a victory they had not expected. Ayanna looked at Dalton, her eyes shining. "You're free," she said, "truly free." Dalton felt the weight of those words settle into his bones. Free? Not because he had run, not because he had hidden, but because someone had stood for him, because the law, for once, had sided with justice. "What now?" he asked. Ayanna folded the letter carefully. "Now you choose." "Choose what?" "What kind of life you want. You are no longer bound by debt, no longer hunted. You can go anywhere, do anything." Dalton looked around the canyon, at the people who had sheltered him, at Dakota grinning from across the fire, at Tokchawana nodding his approval, at Ayanna standing before him with her heart in her eyes. "I already chose," he said quietly. "When?" "The day you bought me." He stepped closer. "The day you gave me a reason to believe the world could be something other than cruel." Ayanna's breath caught. "I'm staying," Dolphin said, "if you'll have me. Not because I owe you, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this," he gestured to the camp, to the canyon, to her, "this is home. You are home." Tears slipped down Ayanna's cheeks, and she did not wipe them away. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything." She closed the distance between them and took his hands in hers. "Then stay," she whispered. "Stay and build a life with me. Stay and prove that mercy can create something stronger than hatred. Stay because Her voice broke. "Because I love you," she finished, "and I cannot imagine this world without you in it." Dalton felt something crack open inside him, something that had been frozen for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He pulled her close, and she came willingly, resting her forehead against his. "I love you too," he said, "more than I knew I could love anything." Around them, the camp watched in silence, and then, slowly, they began to smile. Nia, who had been so wary, nodded her approval. Takshawana raised his walking stick in blessing. The children giggled and whispered, and Dakota, young and brash, whooped loudly, breaking the tension and sending everyone into laughter. Dalton kissed Ayanna there, in the center of the camp, under the endless sky with the whole world watching. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged. Not because he had earned it, but because she had given it freely, and because he had chosen to accept it.
5 years later, the canyon had changed. New shelters had been built, stronger and more permanent. A garden had been planted near the creek, where corn and squash grew in neat rows. The horse corral had been expanded. Children ran between the lodges, their laughter echoing off the red rock walls. The camp had grown. Word had spread of the place where Comanche and white lived side by side, where the old ways were honored, but survival mattered more than pride. Families trickled in, cautious at first, but drawn by the promise of safety and acceptance. It was not large, perhaps 40 people now, but it was thriving. Dalton stood at the canyon's edge, watching the sunset over the plains. His hair was longer now, tied back in the Comanche way. His skin had darkened from years under the sun. He wore a mix of clothing, buckskin and cotton, boots and moccasins, a man caught between two worlds, but comfortable in both. Footsteps approached behind him. Ayanna. She moved to stand beside him, and he slipped his arm around her waist. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. Dakota says the horses are ready for the drive to the fort. If we leave at dawn, we can be back before the first snow. Good. They had become traders, moving between the Comanche camps and the frontier towns, carrying goods, building trust, proving that cooperation was possible if men were willing to try. It was slow work, dangerous sometimes, but it mattered. "And the children?" Dalton asked. Ayanna smiled. "Restless, excited. Nia says they've been asking about you all day." "The children? 3 of them now, 2 boys and a girl. Not all born to them. One had been found orphaned after a raid, another brought by a dying mother who had begged her to care for her son. But they were theirs now, in every way that mattered. I'll tell them a story tonight." "Which one?" "The one about the woman who bought a man's life." Ayanna laughed softly. "They've heard that one a dozen times. Then they can hear it again." She turned to look at him, her eyes warm. "Are you happy?" "More than I ever thought possible." "Even when things are hard?" "Especially then." She kissed him, soft and lingering, and he tasted the salt of the wind on her lips. When she pulled back, she studied his face, as if memorizing it. "What?" he asked. "I'm just thinking," she said, "how strange it is that mercy can grow into love, that a choice made in anger at injustice can become the foundation of a life." "Not strange, inevitable. You gave me a chance when the world said I didn't deserve one. How could I not love you for that? And you stayed when you could have left. How could I not love you for that?" They stood together as the sky deepened from copper to violet to indigo, the stars appearing one by one like promises being kept. Behind them, the camp settled into evening rhythms. Fires were lit, stories were told. Life continued, fragile and precious, and worth fighting for. And in the morning, they would ride out again, together, into whatever came next. Because that was what they did now. They endured, they built, they loved, and they did not break.
Thanks for watching this story till the end. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And before you go, check out these other amazing Western stories waiting for you next. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you on the next ride.